The insiders, top officials from all corners of the Trump administration sounding the alarm about President Trump. With so much attention on the president's coronavirus diagnosis and his handling of the pandemic, which has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans, it may be easy to forget the very real other threats from abroad. And joining me now are two people who know those threats well. Former Commandant of the Coast Guard, Admiral Paul Zukunft, and Chuck Park, a career Foreign Service officer. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us. And Admiral, let me start with you. It's very rare for a former top-ranking military official to speak out against a commander-in-chief, especially one for whom he served, but clearly you find it to be necessary. What specifically did you see, did you experience, that brought you to the conclusion that President Trump is unfit for office?
Well, there's a number of facets to that, Jake, and the first one was really the holding of ransom, if you will, of the entire Coast Guard over a conflict over an appropriation for the wall. I volunteer here in Hawaii at a food bank, and so for several pay periods, every member of the Coast Guard was not paid. Our junior enlisted personnel were hurt the most. And it's ironic that our junior enlisted, when they take an oath to not just support and defend the Constitution of the United States, but to obey the orders of the President of the United States specifically, yet they were held ransom and not paid. And when I saw them show up at the food bank, they were utterly embarrassed that they had to rely upon a food bank in order to feed their family. That was the first indication of breaking faith with our service members.
Chuck, in the Trump presidency, chaos is a feature, not a bug. He thrives in chaos. What does that mean for U.S. allies? What does it mean for U.S. enemies?
That's an amazing question. So I have to say that, I resigned after only about 10 years in the Foreign Service as a U.S. diplomat, and it became impossible to keep up, to represent, to defend this president and his policies overseas. That's not just because of the incompetence and how, these clear marching orders that we'd received via cable one morning could be completely thrown out the window, upended, an hour later by some errant tweet from the president, but also because of a real moral crisis within the State Department. As every other American heard in 2018, there were tapes of children crying in detention centers. There was an image of a man and his daughter face down in the muddy banks of the Rio Grande. So for me, the decision was I could no longer faithfully follow orders amid the chaos and amid the true absence of any kind of moral consideration of our foreign policy. So the right thing for me to do was resign. But when you talk about the chaos, that's absolutely right. The State Department is being assaulted from the outside. The president keeps calling it the deep state. The deep state doesn't exist. Okay, the spoiler alert, there is no deep state. I was inside. There's no conspiracy trying to undermine him. There are a lot of faithful career diplomats trying to keep up.
And what is the result of all this chaos on our allies and on our enemies?
There are a lot of really difficult conversations happening in rooms where we can no longer sit. There are quiet meetings of all of our friends in Europe, in NATO, in the G7, talking about us basically behind our backs. I had one experience in Canada where I was it was a think tank meeting of experts, and a lot of senior Canadian diplomats were there. And maybe because of my appearance, they didn't know that I was an American diplomat, sitting kind of in the back seat, listening and taking notes. And as a service to them, I won't quote them directly, but they were incredibly concerned with just the madness coming out of the White House.
Admiral, we've lived through now in the Trump years a number of crises, whether it has to do with racial mistrust in this country, police brutality, whether it deals with the coronavirus. And as a leader, I'm wondering what you think of President Trump's leadership during these crises.
Jake, I've dealt with probably one of the more complex crises, and that was the Deepwater Horizon oil spill back in 2010. It's easy to fix blame, but blame gets you no closer to a solution. Yet what we're seeing now is every crisis that hits the airwaves It's an immediate finger pointing of who do we blame. Well, not just fixing blame, but it's then laced with hatred. And then that hatred devolves into a polarized nation. I remember very well, I could, mostly conservative values, I could sit down with a liberal, and we could have a conversation. And topics we could agree to disagree on. But now it's a win-lose proposition. We become a very polarized nation and are no closer to fixing the solution to a pandemic that is killing hundreds of Americans each and every day.
Admiral, President Trump famously or infamously said he knows more than the generals. He's also suggested that generals, admirals like to go to war because they're able to make money when they go into the defense contracting industry. What kind of impact do those kind of comments have on the people who run the military?
Well, Jake, it's literally jaw-dropping. When I served over 41 years on active duty, my first mantra was what we say, look out for my shipmates. Look out for the most junior people in our service and do everything I can within my sphere of influence to keep them out of harm's way. So we don't just jump into a conflict with no diplomatic end in sight. And it's a little bit ironic because coming from the smallest armed service and the most underfunded service, I'm clearly not in a position to say we're trying to leverage the military-industrial complex for personal gain. The only legacy any of us who have served is, did we leave the world a better place? Did we look out for our troops? And if you could answer those with great satisfaction, then you can sleep well at night. And I do.
Chuck, Admiral, thank you both. Appreciate your time. Up next, I'll talk to the man who was in the room where it happened, who tells me President Trump has the attention span of a fruit fly. The Insiders continues right after this.